Hi, everybody. This is Tracy, and I'm here to review episode number 2 of Greenleaf, which airs on the OWN network. This episode was entitled The Baptism. When the show opens up, we have a scene where there's a teenage girl and she's talking to a younger girl, and she's talking to her about Jesus and about his unconditional love. And at first I thought that the older girl was Faith and she's talking to either Charity or Grace. But the more I think about it, I'm thinking maybe it was Grace was the oldest girl, and it was Faith that she's talking to. In any event, it turns out that it's a dream sequence, and that it's actually Grace that's having the dream. So still not sure who the characters were in the dream. Then we move on to a scene where Lady May is standing in like one of the suites in the house, but the furniture's covered up, and there are workers that are delivering boxes, and they're bringing in the boxes, and the maid, who's played by Terry Vaughn, comes in, and she asks Lady May, what does she want to do with the boxes? Does she want her to unpack them? And Lady May tells her no, she doesn't want to do anything with the boxes. And then the maid walks out. And one thing I noticed about the maid was she seemed to have like I don't know if it's animosity or jealousy. I probably would have an issue too if I had to walk around wearing a maid uniform, the black uniform with the little white apron. That would probably bother me too. But I think that may come back later, that there's some friction between the maid and Lady May, and she may reveal some secrets or something within the family. I don't know, but I just feel like that's going to come back. Okay, so then the scene moves from Lady May in the suite to a scene with Jacob and Carissa, and they're still in the bed when Jacob's phone rings. And Jacob reaches over and he realizes that it's his dad on the phone. And so I want to pause right here, because in my review of the first episode, I kept referring to Jacob's dad as Pastor Greenleaf, but it's actually Bishop Greenleaf. And if you're in the church, you know that these people, they get real funny about their titles. So I don't want anybody yelling at me for calling him Pastor Greenleaf when it's actually Bishop Greenleaf. So Bishop Greenleaf is telling Jacob that he's made the decision to put him over the Deacons board. And Jacob, you can tell by his expression that he's really not interested in the position. So Carissa, she leans over and she's like, well, what does he want? What is he talking about? And, she's ever trying to groom Jacob and show him how important it is that he play along in order to one day become pastor at the church. And so Jacob tells her, and then she's like, well, tell him, you'll do it. So Jacob, he's like, oh my God. So then he agrees to be over the Deacons board. So then later we see Jacob, and he's arrived at the church, and he sees Alexa, and he tells Alexa that he's been locked out of his computer, and he needs to have his password reset, and that he'll stop by her office later. So she agrees and says okay. So when Jacob arrives at her office, she's smiling and she goes, unforgettable. And then he goes, unforgettable? What's unforgettable? And she says, your new password. And he, tells her, oh, I just wanted to come by and see you and see if you're available. Tonight maybe I can come by. And so Alexa's excited, that he wants to come by, and she offers to cook dinner. But of course, Jacob isn't interested in dinner. He's only interested in one thing, and that's getting him some Alexa. And so, she kind of looks sad when he says he just wants her, but, she agrees because they get to spend some time together. So fast forward to later that evening with the deacons, and Jacob comes into the meeting. And the team is like, okay, well, where's Bishop Greenleaf? And so Jacob tells them that he's going to be leading the meeting. And so they say, okay, well, the things we want to talk about, we'll put them to the side until the bishop is here. So Jacob is like, well, what is it? Tell me what it is. Maybe I can fix it. So they tell Jacob that, well, one of the issues that they're having is that the church, the morning service is running over and is causing issues in the parking lot for the people that are coming in for the next service. And so then Jacob says, okay, well, what can the bishop do? And so they say, well, he's the problem because he's going on and on and on with the announcements, and church is getting out late. So Jacob is like, oh Lord, I'm not touching that. So he goes, well, what else do you have? Why don't we talk to Kevin? He's here, to talk about the outreach ministry. And so they said, well, no, we want to talk about something else. So it was like they didn't want to talk to Kevin, or they didn't want to talk to Kevin without the bishop being there. So Jacob is kind of dismissing them. He's trying to rush the meeting along. And so when we see Jacob again, he's at Alexa's apartment, and she's trying to be really romantic, but Jacob is trying to get her into bed because he, has to get home to Carissa. And so, they have this, passionate sex scene going on, and Jacob is just releasing some frustration, whereas Alexa, she's romanticizing over the evening. So Alexa kind of strikes me as the type that will probably tell Carissa, but then again, we already know that Carissa knows that Jacob is having an affair. We just don't know if she knows that it's Alexa that he's having the affair with. So it'll be interesting to see how that works out. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Grace. So when we see Grace again in the show, she's taking Sophia to school. And in the background, you can hear a news story on the radio, and they're talking about the police-involved shooting. So we now know that this is the second episode that this has come up. So this shooting of the police officer is going to play some type of pivotal role in the show going forward, because it keeps coming up in the different scenes. So we know that the police officer's name is David Nelson. And as they're driving along, Sophia tells Grace that she's talked to her dad. Her dad is upset that they've decided to stay in Tennessee instead of, not just stay in Memphis, instead of going to New York, where Grace was offered a job to work for 2020. And I'm not sure if she's a producer or if she's an on-air personality, but now we know that when she left the preaching field, she went into some type of media role. So after Grace drops Sophia off at school, she goes to the church, and she's with her dad and Alexa as Alexa is running down the list of things that she needs to do and telling her about her password, and she's giving her, I think it was like her cell phone, her ID, and those type of things. And this is also the scene that I mentioned earlier with Jacob, where he tells Alexa that he's locked out of his computer. And during this scene, the father kind of picks up that there's something going on between Alexa and Jacob. So I'm not sure if he's going to, at a later point, confront Jacob about that. So Alexa's going over everything that Grace needs to know, and she tells her that she has a meeting later on that day with a Sister Betty Wilcox, who is a member of the Bishop's Round Table. So, she needs to give this lady special treatment. So Grace is like, the Bishop's Round Table, what is that? And so come to find out that the Bishop's Round Table is a group of members of the church who have given $10,000 or more above and beyond their regular tithe and offering. So I guess they get special treatment within the church. And so when Grace and her dad are alone, she asked him, well, where did you find Alexa at? And so the dad tells her that Alexa used to date a member of the Memphis Grizzlies, which I think is the pro basketball team in Memphis. And so Grace, puts it together, and she's like, oh my God, so like you hired her in hopes of getting in the pockets of these professional athletes. And one of the things that I'm loving so much about Greenleaf is that I'm familiar with the church, and a lot of the stuff that's going on is actually things that happen within the church, because I know a pastor here in our area who was trying to, cozy up to some of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers players and get them in the church and hope that they would give to his vision. And then, Alexa being so efficient in her job is funny, because, I attended a church before where the church secretary was nothing like Alexa. She was not trying to help you do anything. She wasn't following up on what the pastor stuff is doing. So it's just real funny to see some of the things that actually do happen in churches. So I think that's one of the reasons I'm really liking the show. So the bishop takes Grace and shows her office. So she has this really big, nice office, introduces her to her secretary. So she gets her own secretary. And, he's basically explained to her what her role is in the church. And so she's going to be like the minister over outreach, like the different outreach services. And he's explaining to her that it's really important how she treats the members of the church. And so Grace kind of puts it together and says, oh, so basically whatever, Sister Wilcox wants, she gets it, because she's paying all this money. And, you know, he pats her on the shoulder and is like, yeah, you figured it out. You've got it. Later on in the day, Grace has her meeting with Sister Wilcox. And Sister Wilcox basically has a granddaughter, and she wants Grace to, well, she actually wants Bishop Greenleaf to baptize the baby. And so Grace is looking for the procedures on doing the baptism. And Sister Wilcox is like, you know, you don't have to worry about the procedures. You know, we can do this afternoon. And so Grace is like, well, where are the parents? And then Sister Wilcox says that the baby's mother, who's her daughter, is on vacation. And, you know, we all know that vacation means that they are in prison. And she says that the baby's father is out of the picture. And so Grace agrees to, well, not at that point, it's later on, she does agree to do the baptism. So after Sister Wilcox leaves Grace's office, she is looking at the phone, and she realizes that there are some messages left on the phone. So she's listening to the messages, and there's one from David Nelson, who is the police officer that shot and killed the unarmed guy. And so Grace listens to the message, and he's basically saying on the message that he's been trying to contact the church, that he's a member of the church, and he needs to meet with Bishop Greenleaf to talk about, you know, what's going on with him. So we leave that scene and we go over and we're at the bishop's office, and he's having a meeting with Uncle Mac, and Alexis is there. And Alexis is running down this list of items that the senator, if you remember from the first episode, they are doing an investigation into church finances to see if churches are taking advantage of their tax exempt status. And so they are, Alexa is going down the list, telling them all these things that the senator wants to do his investigation. When Alexa gets done with the list, she looks towards the bishop and asks him, you know, so what do you want me to do? And he informs her that he wants her to do absolutely nothing, because they're going to teach the senator a lesson on how things are handled in the house of the Lord. So that's going to be a good look because I don't think they want to turn over those records, because there's probably some shady stuff going on. So the next scene takes us to Lady Mae and Carissa, and they're back at the mansion and they're having a food tasting, and Lady Mae is planning to do a women's conference. And so her and Carissa are putting together the menu for the conference, and evidently it's a big annual event that Lady Mae puts on. So when Carissa asked her, you know, have you came up with a theme and, you know, for the conference, she's like very proud, and I'm thinking she's about to come out with something really profound. But homegirl says, oh, it's going to be Proverbs 31, the virtuous woman. And I'm thinking, Lady Mae, come on now. How many hundreds, thousands, millions of times have there been conferences on the virtuous woman? It's time to take it to another level. But she's more concerned about this food that Carissa has brought to her for this tasting. And she's going on and on about the small portions and why are the portions so small. So Carissa assures her that they can have bigger portions. So then Carissa takes the opportunity to change the subject to Grace. And she's asking all these questions about Grace and how Lady Mae feels about Grace and her newfound, you know, religion, that she's not all into the church. And so Lady Mae, you know, she doesn't want to talk about Grace, and it seems like particularly with Carissa, because she knows that Carissa's end game is to get Jacob to be the pastor, the next pastor in charge, and not Grace. So she tells Carissa that her husband has made the decision and he wants Grace, and she stands by her husband when it comes to matters of discernment, because of spiritual discernment, because he's better at that than she is. So Carissa, you know, not to be undone, she just says, oh, I understand, but she keeps asking questions about Grace. So Lady Mae, in all her dignified glory, turns to Carissa and says to her, honey, you know, strength like yours is best expressed in stillness. And that seemed to have done the trick, because Carissa shut her mouth and they went back to talking about these portions of food, and Lady Mae wanted her to ensure that they were going to have bigger portions at the luncheon. So next we see Lady May. She goes to visit Noah, and I'm not sure if she thinks that Noah and Grace may be rekindling their relationship. But when she goes to Noah, she's telling him about, how his father had done so much for the church and how she really loves Isabel. And so she wants to help plan the wedding. And not only does she want to help plan their wedding, but she wants to expedite things and have the wedding on the estate. And so Noah was kind of reluctant, but, she put on the charm and convinced him that it would be best, and that she thinks that Isabel would really love it, and it would be, a lot of work off of her because they would take care of everything. So Noah eventually agrees to have the wedding and says that he'll talk to Isabel about it. So then as Lady May is leaving, she says to Noah that she thinks Grace may be up to something, and she would really appreciate it if he would keep an eye on her and just come back and let Lady May know if he sees her doing anything if he sees Grace doing anything out of the ordinary. So next we're going to talk about Charity and Kevin. So when we first see Charity in this episode, she is in a meeting, and she's in a meeting with, I think it's her assistant, and a guy named Nigel, who is the choir director, and they're going back and forth over this song that Nigel wants to do on Sunday, but Charity is like, we are tired of hearing that song, and on Sunday morning, we better not hear that song. So she's putting her foot down, and so there's a little bickering back and forth, and then Nigel gives in and tell her, fine, whatever you want to do, we'll do that. Just let me know what song you want us to perform. So after Nigel leaves, Charity and her assistant, they start giggling, and the assistant asks her, girl, what has gotten into you? And at that point, Charity confides in her that her and Kevin have decided to have a baby, and so I guess the sex is good, and it has her in a good mood, and so that's why she's really upbeat and excited. So then the scene goes to Kevin, and he's having a meeting with I think the guy is a minister. He's either a minister at another church, or he's over a homeless ministry in the community, and they want to lease out I don't know if it's a large dining hall, but there's some room on the church's grounds that they want to rent out to use for their outreach program, where they provide not continuous housing, but I guess the people come in the evenings and they eat, shower, spend the night, and then have breakfast in the morning, and then they leave the premises and go do whatever it is that they do. I guess go to work or to school or whatever. And so you can tell that there's some chemistry brewing between Kevin and this guy. And I mean, it was just undeniable. And they're both just like smiling at each other. You know how we are when we have a crush on somebody. So that we know that's going to manifest itself somewhere along the way. And so later that night we have Charity and Kevin, and they're in the bed, and Charity's trying to, get in the mood and be romantic so they can have sex and start working on this baby. But Kevin, I think because of the interaction he had earlier in the day, he's kind of not focused on Charity that night. And so, she gets on top of him, and she's asking him, are you sure you want to do this? What's wrong? And so he's giving her all kinds of little hints that, he's not really into this thing. He's telling her, I just don't want to disappoint you. I don't want, things to go bad. He just kept saying, I don't want to disappoint you. But she was not hearing the little warning signs he was giving her. And so she eventually talks him into it and kind of rubs him down and, do some things to get him in the mood. And so we leave them with their awkward sex scene again. So that whole, the guy being suspect, that's just such a turn off to me. And I never understand why women can't tell that they're men like men, but hey. So next we have Bishop Greenleaf and Lady May, and they're sitting in his office, just chit-chatting about things that are going on. And he shares with Lady May that there's a couple in the church who have just purchased this new home, and it must be like a really expensive home, because he says that the home was either owned by the actor Morgan Freeman, or the home is near Morgan Freeman's home, maybe in the same community. And Lady Mae was like, oh, how dare they, how can they afford that? And so she uses the opportunity to tell the bishop that now would be a good time for them to purchase their private jet. And so as he's, trying to talk her down from that ledge, Grace walks in and she's confronting him about the messages that she found on her phone from the officer, David Nelson. And he tells her that, he sure is just an oversight. He didn't know anything about the messages. And perhaps the staff was just trying to protect him and protect the church by, thinking it's best that he not get involved with the police shooting incident. And Grace is like, well, he's a member and we should help him if he needs help, at the very least talk to him. And so the bishop tells her, well, he gives us the parable from the Bible. I think it's Matthew 7:6, where Jesus is talking about the pearls and the swine. And he starts reciting the scripture that starts out with, do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine. And so Grace, she's like, has this look on her face like she just can't believe that they're going to dismiss this guy. So then she turns and changes the subject to Sister Wilcox and how she wants to have this baptism. And Lady Mae chimes in and she's like, Grace, do your job. You asked for this, so go baptize the baby. And so that kind of ends that conversation. And so after Grace leaves their office, she reminds the bishop, that she didn't think it was a good idea of bringing Grace back and that they're going to regret it in the end. So then we see Grace rehearsing. She's back in her office and she's rehearsing what she's going to say at the baptism. And then her secretary comes in, and for some reason I can't remember this woman's name. It's something like Betty or Dorothy or Gertrude, something like that. But I'll get the name and I'll know it next time I do a video. And so she's asking, where can she find a robe to perform the baptism? And so she finishes up what she's doing. She finds the robe, and then we see her performing the baptism, and it's just her, Sister Wilcox, and the baby that's being baptized. There's no other family member there or anything. And so the next person we're going to talk about is Sophia. So Sophia's having trouble fitting in her new school. And later that night, after her first day of school, she's complaining and saying how at her old school, she was the only black girl in a all-white school. And here, she is the only white girl in an all-black school. So that lets us know that Sophia's father is probably a white guy. And then she uses this opportunity to tell Grace that she's talked to her father and that he's upset that they are still in Memphis and didn't move to New York as they had originally told him that they were going to do. So with Grace and the father, I'm not sure if they're married or divorced or what's going on with that situation. She doesn't really talk about him, and the only time we've heard about him in the first 2 episodes is when Sophia has brought him up. And so later on, we see Sophia and Zora, and they're going through the boxes that were brought up from Faith's apartment. And Sophia comes across these videos or tapes, and she starts listening to them. And you can tell that she's like having a spiritual connection with Faith through listening to her voice and listening to her talk. And so then we see a scene where Grace is out by the lake that they were talking at when the guy put them out the town car on the first episode, and we see Sophia go out and sit next to her, and then they have like a tender, it's a silent moment. They're not really talking, but you can tell that they're bonding and they have a really close relationship. So this part we're going to talk about Grace. And when Grace went to see Aunt Mavis gave her a package, and in that package was a I think it was like a pen drive, but it was information about the girl, Danielle, who was a member of the church, who had gone to the police to file a report against Uncle Mac about raping her. And so we have Grace, and she's sitting in her office, and she's looking at the video of the girl's police interview. And she decides to go to Noah's house later on, and she's talking to Noah and trying to find out, if somebody had filed a complaint at the church, what would the procedure be? And Noah kind of brushes her off, which was confusing because I thought Noah had a role, like a security role at the church, but he pretty much tells her that somebody else handles those procedures, and he doesn't have that much information. He doesn't play a big role when people file complaints at the church. So the following day is when Grace performs the baptism for Sister Wilcox, and after the baptism, she goes to see Officer David Nelson, and he's staying at a hotel. I guess he's been run out of his house because of all the media coverage, and so he's at this hotel. And as he's trying to talk to Grace and get her to understand what he's going through and how he really wants the church's support, Grace is more interested in getting his insight on this, on the interview that the police had with the girl from the church. And so she has, I guess, like the printed report, and she shares the report with him and asks him, what do you think about this? And so he's trying to get back on track with the, what he's feeling about the shooting, but Grace is really trying to get information so she can try and pin something on Uncle Mike about what he's been doing to the girls at the church. And so the show wraps up with the next day, Grace decides that she's going to go to the girl's house and to talk to the girl's mom and see if she would be able to sit down and speak with the girl. But of course, the mother is angry and upset and tells Grace to leave. And then then Danielle, the girl who was molested, her mother calls Uncle Mike and tells Uncle Mike about Grace coming over, and the show ends with Uncle Mike telling the lady that he'll take care of Grace. So that's it for episode 2. I'm looking forward to episode 3. And if you enjoy what you're seeing, please subscribe to my channel, rate the video, and if there's something I missed or something you want to add, go ahead and comment about it in the comment fields below. And I'll see you next time for episode 4. Bye-bye.